Hey everybody, welcome back. Quick disclaimer, ignore my hair. It needs to be washed. If it looks crazy, that's because it is, but I wasn't gonna wash my hair in order to do this video. So here we go. One of the ways God speaks to me is through song. So a couple of weeks ago, one morning I woke up and there was a part of the song Manifestation by Enrique Holmes that was like playing in my spirit. And it specifically the lyric that says, as we touch you with our faith, we receive manifestation. So I heard that lyric, and then I heard an ad lib that he says about the woman with the issue of blood. 2 days later, I wake up, the same song is playing in my spirit, the same lyric, as we touch you with our faith, we receive manifestation. But this time, instead of the ad lib about the woman with the issue of blood, I hear an ad lib that he does about Lazarus. So whenever God speaks to me with a song, whenever a song just like randomly pops up in my spirit, sometimes it's a Christian or gospel song, sometimes it's not. I always kind of sit with, okay, God, what is it that you are trying to communicate to me? And so when I heard this song in particular over the twice in 1 week, I knew that God wanted me to look at the story about the woman with the issue of blood and the story about Lazarus being raised from the dead, but from the lens of what it has to say about faith. So if you didn't catch it last week, I did a video about what the story of the woman with the issue of blood can teach us about faith. And this week, I want to focus on what the story of Lazarus being raised from the dead can show us about faith. So we find this story in John chapter 11. You may see me look down. I have like a physical Bible, and it is KJV. So if I read from it, you're going to hear the these, the thous, the thuses, and so forth. But at the beginning of the story, we're introduced to Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. They are siblings, and Lazarus is sick. Mary and Martha send word to Jesus to say, hey, the one whom you love is sick, right? They're sending word to have him come. Now, in verse 4, when Jesus hears this, message, whoever they sent with the message, he hears it and he says, this sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God might be glorified also. Now, at first, when I read this, I was like, well, who is Jesus talking to? Because it doesn't really specify if he's talking to the disciples, if he's talking to the messenger. I am inclined to believe that he is talking to the messenger to send word back to Mary and Martha that, hey, this sickness that Lazarus is dealing with, it will not end in death. And I'll tell you why I believe that as I keep going. So we keep going in the story. Remember, they're asking for Jesus to come, and Jesus decides to stay wherever he is for 2 more days. So what do you mean? I am sending word to you that we are in an emergency state. We need you to come. Lazarus is sick. Obviously, this sickness must be near death if we're sending for you to come, and we know that you can do something about it. Also, they send word to Jesus because they are close with Jesus. They have a relationship with Jesus. And we can tell that from the text because they say, hey, the one whom you love. There's also a scripture in here with the detail that Jesus loves Martha, Mary, and Lazarus. So he has a relationship with them. So why is it that he is staying 2 days wherever he is? Why is it that he's lingering for 2 days instead of coming immediately? Now, how many times in our situations where something happens and we're like, God, I need you to come now, and it seems like Jesus is lingering, right? Now, we keep going. After those 2 days, Jesus then says to the disciples, let's go to Judea because our friend Lazarus is sleeping, but I go that I may awake him out of his sleep. Well, he's referring to Lazarus as his friend. So this is a person that you care about. and he uses the term sleep. He says that Lazarus is asleep, and the disciples respond like, okay, well, if he's asleep, he'll be well. But what Jesus did was use a popular euphemism for death to illustrate and emphasize the temporary nature of death. And the disciples misunderstood and thought he was talking about natural sleep, right? And when he says that I go that I may awake him out of his sleep, when the disciples misunderstand Jesus and say like, okay, well, if he sleep, he'll be all right, he'll be fine, then Jesus says to them plainly, Lazarus is dead. And I'm actually glad that I wasn't there for your sake, so that you might believe. And it's like, believe what? Well, believe that I can wake him out of his sleep. Believe in my authority over death, right? So they journey to Bethany, and they hadn't quite made it to Bethany yet. And when Jesus came, this is in verse 17, he finds out that Lazarus had been in the tomb for 4 days. Okay. Now, let me not say I couldn't. As I studied, I learned that the reason why 4 days was so important was because there was this common Jewish superstition or belief that when a person died, their soul kind of stayed around and lingered around the body for 3 days with hopes of re-entering the body. So Jewish people by day 4 would have believed or declared death final. Like, there's nothing else you can do. You know, we waited the 3 days, the soul didn't return. So that's it, right? And Martha hears that Jesus is coming. So Martha hears that Jesus is coming. So she leaves the house, leaves Mary in the house, goes to meet Jesus. And the first thing she says is, Jesus, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Then she says in verse 22, but I know even now that whatever you ask of God, God the Father, he will do, right? So she understands that Jesus has authority. And she also understands that he has healing power, which is why she's like, if you had just been here, he would not have died. And so Jesus's response is, well, he responds compassionately to her, your brother will rise again. And so Martha is still declaring her faith, right? She already said, hey, I know whatever you ask God, he will do. I know if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. And when he says, your brother will rise again, Martha says, oh yeah, I know. She's exercising her faith again, what she has been divinely persuaded to believe. She said, I know I'll see him again in the resurrection on the last day. And Jesus responds with, I am the resurrection and I am the life. Right? It ain't about no last day. It's about, if you believe, if you have been divinely persuaded of my authority over life and death, then you'll see your brother again. And so you can tell, like, she has this tension between her faith and God's timing and purposes. And also you see that there is a lack of a full understanding of Jesus's authority, not just to heal, but to resurrect, right? So he asked her, after he says, I am the resurrection and the life, he says, he that believes in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live, and whosoever lives and believes in me shall never die. And he asked her, do you believe this? Now, believe is from the same root word, faith, if you go and study the woman with the issue of blood. Now, I don't know if I said this at the beginning, I may have, but I did a video on the woman with the issue of blood last week, and I'll put a link in the description. But if you go and look at that video, I talk about how faith is defined in that context as a divine persuasion based on, how Christ reveals to you who he is and how he acts, who he is and what he does, I should say. And based on that, once you get a revelation, then you are divinely persuaded to believe, right? And then it causes you to act. So in this context, believe comes from that same root, meaning a divine persuasion. So he's saying, based on what I'm saying to you, are you divinely persuaded that I am the resurrection and the life? And she's like, yes, I do believe. I believe that you are Christ, you are the Son of God, which should come into the world. So even then, she's declaring her faith in Jesus again as being the Messiah, the one sent to save and restore. But she's not yet fully grasping his authority, his full authority over both death and life. So we keep going. Martha goes to whisper and tell Mary that, hey, the teacher is here. He's asking for you. Mary rushes out the house. She rushes out so hastily that the Jews that had come to grieve and weep with them think that she's headed to the tomb to weep at the tomb. So they follow behind her. Mary meets Jesus as he's still coming, and she falls at his feet and she says the same thing that Martha says. Lord, if you had been here, then my brother would not have died, right? And Jesus sees her weeping. He sees the people around weeping, and he's deeply moved. And he says, where have you laid him? And after he says, where have you laid him? And they say, okay, Lord, come and see. He then weeps. So now we see that Mary still understands Jesus's power, and she has faith in his healing power as well, yet she's deeply, deeply grieved. So then this illustrates another tension or struggle between, not a tension, I'm sorry, but it illustrates our struggle with understanding God's timing and how that is met with Jesus's presence and suffering. So he understands, Jesus knows he's going to raise Lazarus from the dead. But even though he recognizes, hey, you don't understand my timing and my divine purpose, I still have compassion for you and your suffering. I can still weep with you when you're mourning, right? And so he says, where have you laid him? And they said, unto him, Lord, come and see. Now that where have you laid him, that also illustrates God will come to the exact place where you need rescuing. Because he could have called Lazarus forth from wherever he was. He could have said that way back when he got the message. But where have you put him? I'm going to go to the direct spot. I'm going to meet him right there. So then they get to the tomb. And in verse 39, Jesus says, take away the stone. And Martha immediately says, Lord, by this time he stinks, for he has been dead 4 days. So we still see Martha is still having this tension, still having this battle with faith and the reality of what she saw with her natural eyes, right? Because the stone is signifying the finality of death because it has sealed the tomb. Like, what else is there to do? Not only is the tomb sealed, but it has been 4 days. His body has started to decay, right? Listen to Jesus's response. Jesus says to her in verse 40, didn't I say to you that if you would believe, you would see the glory of God? Now that is why I think in verse 4, Jesus, when he says what he says in verse 4, this sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, and that the Son of God may be glorified also. That was a message that he was sending back to Mary and Martha. That was a promise that he was saying, hey, go send this back to them. I'm not coming right now, but send them the promise that Lazarus is sick, but it's not going to end in death. And so then I had to think about, what did they feel when you receive a promise? Hey, your brother's sick, but it's not going to end in death. And then the very thing that wasn't supposed to happen happens. It's not supposed to end in death, but my brother is dead. It's not supposed to end in death, but his body has begun to decay. And how many times in our lives where we look at our situation and we're like, God, you gave me a promise about something, and the very thing that you promised me, I'm actually seeing the opposite of that promise. Where does your faith lie then? Can you still believe? Can you still be divinely persuaded that what God said is actually what's going to happen, despite the evidence that what you see in front of you with your natural eye is not what the promise is? And so in verse 40, when he says, then I tell you that if you would believe, if you would be divinely persuaded, that you would see the glory of God. Now that see is not just something that's visible, but that see means more than visibility. It means that you would have a revelation that confirms reality. So what's the reality in this case? The glory of God, the manifested presence and power of God. So if you are divinely persuaded of who I am and what I said is what it is, then can you act in obedience by removing this stone, right? Because that was an act of obedience. You think that this situation is pointless, this situation is done, death is final, but I'm saying I need you to act in faith and move that stone out of the way. So can we still obey God's instructions even when the situation seems hopeless? Can we do that, right? Where does our faith lie? So then Jesus, they took away the stone, and then Jesus says to God in heaven, he says, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I know that you always hear me, but I've said this for the sake of the people around me, which teaches us, thank God before the miracle occurs. I haven't seen it. And matter of fact, it seems like the situation is looking mighty dead, but I have a promise of this. Well, before that promise has come, even when it looks like the miracle is not going to happen, thank me for it anyway. Thank me for it before you see it, and continue to believe that what I said is what it is, right? So then after that happens, in verse 43, Jesus speaks he cries with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. Now that cries would indicate like an audible, emphatic outburst. Loud carries the notion of magnitude. So when Jesus is crying aloud, it's not in terms of volume, but it's in terms of authority, right? He is signifying, when he cries in a loud voice, it signifies an authoritative announcement. Well, what is he announcing? He is announcing Lazarus's resurrection and his dominion, right? Because there's an authority and intensity with which Jesus will call you out of death and call you to restoration, right? So then in verse 44, it says, and he that was dead came forth, meaning Lazarus came forth. He was bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was bound with a napkin. Jesus said unto them, loose him and let him go. Right? So Lazarus came forth. He was alive, yet he was still bound. And in order for Jesus to bring Lazarus to complete restoration, to set him back at one, he ordered the grave clothes to be loosed. He ordered the grave clothes to let him go, right? Because you cannot look like what I just brought you out of, right? I am letting you know that in your restoration, you are released from death and you are restored to life. And then just as an aside, this don't have nothing to do with faith, but when Jesus says to them, loose him and let him go, he's talking to the community. He's talking to the onlookers, right? Go untie him. Now, when you're raised from death to life, when you're saved and when God is restoring you, do you have people around you that realize that you're alive yet you're bound, that will help untie you, that will help loose you? Do you have people, a community around you that are committed to your freedom? Just something to think about. If you don't, you need to. Because I don't want nobody around me that's not allowing me to walk in full freedom. Okay? Just an aside. Back to the faith topic. So at the beginning, I was telling you how God speaks to me in song, and I knew he was kind of telling me something about my own situation. And so I am facing something and have been facing something that seems dead, that seems hopeless, that seems like a lot. That's how I can put it. And God has given me a promise that it's going to be all right. It's taken care of. But I don't see it, right? Because it seems hopeless. Because it's not something I can do anything about. Like when this thing, in order for this thing to work out and be taken care of, it has to be done by God. That's the only way. And so what I got from this and what I want to share with you is that there comes a time in your walk with God where he forces you into a situation to increase your faith. Because it would seem, sometimes I feel like when I look at something that God is doing in scripture, it seems cruel in some ways. Like, why would you delay? Why would you linger? And you know I need you to come. But it's not that. It's that God's ways are not our ways. His thoughts are not our thoughts. They are higher. And so he has a divine purpose for what he's doing. And so there is a time that in your spiritual walk where your faith has to increase. Yes, you believe me to heal, but can you believe me to resurrect, right? So I felt like he was like, look at your situation. Yes, I have the power to intervene. Because I was like, I was giving Mary and Martha. God, if you had just intervened months ago, it wouldn't even be what it is right now. But then also my faith wouldn't be where it is right now, right? Because he's like, yes, I do have the power to intervene and keep you from certain situations and outcomes. But he also has the power to restore and breathe new life into any situation that we think is past the point of no return. Right? So if you examine your own life and whatever you're facing, even when the situation looks like it's past the point of no return, don't call dead what God calls asleep. Don't call permanent what God is calling temporary. If he gave you a promise, even if what he promised, everything in front of you in your natural eye, in your natural situation looks the opposite of the promise, you have a promise, hold on to the promise. If you're divinely persuaded of who God is and what he said he will do with your promise, believe it and act in obedience to the instructions that he gives you while you're waiting for that promise to be manifested. He's not late. He's coming. I'll see you on the next video.